I've been trying to capture what's bothering me about the emphasis on leadership development. And it's been bothering me for a while. And I must confess to being influenced somewhat by Henry Mintzberg, the kind of maverick Canadian theorist who's still cracking on. Still he's he's pretty old, but he's still putting some stuff out there. But I'm not certain about any of this. So for those on the call who are actually inside organizations and not external consultants like many of us are, I'm hoping that you can ground us in what's actually going on in your businesses, in your organizations, in terms of L&D spend and in terms of development focus. You know, am I drinking too much of my own Kool-Aid, or is this something that's real? So I'm bringing it to you guys, hopefully for joint discussion and reflection. Also, a slight change in the format of the call. We normally follow Louise's advice and have a check-in right at the beginning. And I'm not doing that today. I want to get into the meat of it and then put you into discussion as, you know, still fairly quickly, but we'll try and double down on that. So you'll do the check-ins with each other and that conversation probably in about 45 minutes time. So let's get on with it. We developed a program called 9 Conversations in Leadership in 2004. And hopefully that's on your screens now. And, you know, Louise has published something on LinkedIn, I think yesterday. For those of you following Louise Van Rijn, you'll have noticed that she said, are we paying attention to our own kind of lived experience? And what I noticed is that in 2024, so 20 years later, my social media feed is dominated by leadership. The conversation is leadership. And I wasn't seeing anything really on management development. And where I did see anything about management development, it was as if management and leadership were being used as the same term. So even in the same document, you would read leadership management as if they were talking about the same thing. Now, that may be just my algorithm, and it may just be some sort of social media bias, but in terms of paying attention to our own experience, Worldview, amongst other things, Worldview Academy works on strategy. So if you take an organizational development approach to strategy development, you're in conversation, usually with a framework on the table. And one of the frameworks is Blue Ocean strategy. And the central premise or idea in Blue Ocean strategy is red oceans, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, are red because of the blood of the competition. So everybody's biting and gouging each other to try and survive, and the ocean turns red. Blue Ocean strategy, a non-competitive space, some space that you could move your organization to where there's something new. And it started to feel to me as if leadership development is a red ocean at the moment. Now, we're a provider. So as a provider to organizations, it feels to me as if leadership development work is everywhere. Everybody's making claims and counterclaims about their take or their nuance or their flavor of leadership development. It's getting cheaper, so it's being commoditized in a way. And it seems to me that in those conditions, value diminishes, that there's no competitive advantage to leadership development because it's just me too. Everybody's spending on it as a matter of course. It's a ticket to the game rather than some kind of competitive advantage. So what does that mean? And particularly, what does it mean if we just dismiss the management stuff? You know, Liesl and I were having a conversation before you all came into the call, and Liesl reflected on the fact that in her social media feed, you get this picture of the manager standing at the back whipping people and the leader standing at the front kind of gloriously welcoming people. And there's this connotation of management bad, leadership good. And then we just talk about leadership. So, you know, why should we care? Is this just semantics? So classically, leadership is about vision and change and innovation. And I really have just selected a few characteristics of classical leadership and classical management. There are many more, but just some to give us a sense of why are we having this conversation. So vision, change, and innovation, that kind of come with me voice of leadership. And then classical management around process, structure, and stability. Of course, the similarity is both are trying to achieve organizational goals. Leadership activities are motivation, inspiration, alignment. Classical management, very classically, talks about planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And I want to emphasize all four: plan, organize, lead, and control. But both involve decision-making, problem-solving, and so on. Leadership for me has always been associated with change. That, 20 years ago, I created a few videos to support the 9 Conversations in Leadership program, and I talked about putting leadership in a little box on the wall behind some glass saying break in case of emergency. And that was my opinion in 2004, 2005, that nobody really wants leadership all the time. This kind of constant rallying, constant almost patriarchal, matriarchal kind of presence, driving and navigating transformational change. Now, I know we have the saying that we're living in a VUCA world. And if again, back to good strategy, a good organization strategy responds perfectly to its environment. So if the environment is changing constantly, the organization would have to change constantly. I was listening yesterday to one of Mintzberg's books, and he reminds us that we buy into the story that everything is changing, but is it really? Technology is changing for sure, but I'm guessing that you had breakfast this morning, you woke up in the room that was the same, you dressed in clothes, and Mintzberg's favorite point is buttons. When you put your shirt on, it still had buttons on it, which had been around forever. We're almost being conditioned to ignore the things that are not changing and to celebrate the cult of change. And he talks about that in terms of his view of the cult of leadership. So managers classically implement, deliver, and stabilize changes. So you can have, as a leader, all of these wonderful visions for change, but somebody's got to get the work done. From the people side, you can't escape, even though many people try to, the word followership. And here Mintzberg has, I guess, his biggest problem with the cult of leadership. Even the word empowerment, he sees as patriarchal. If we're going to talk about empowerment, it means I have it and I have to share it with you. And if I don't share it with you, you don't get any. So followership. And that has always been, possibly just because of my personality, slightly problematic, that in order for there to be a leader, there needs to be followers. And that kind of casts the world into a few leaders and many followers. On the management side, classically, managers develop and utilize individual and team performance. So they would use words like subordinates in the possibly less fashionable sense, or colleagues in the professional environment. But both require an understanding of team dynamics and individual motivation. And then on the impact side, you typically would measure leadership by change and strategic direction. Biggest job of leadership, set the direction. This is where we're going, get buy into that. Management, strategic outcomes, effectiveness, efficiency, performance metrics. So that's my attempt, I guess, to try to contrast them, but without, firstly, and I'll keep repeating this, I don't want to oversimplify, and I don't want to try and pretend that you could do one without the other. So I love Mintzberg's line. I think I used it in some of the stuff I wrote over the last few weeks. Have you ever been managed without being led? And that must be awful, for what we think of leadership. Particularly, it's around its individual consideration, a connection, to work with my heart rather than, my wallet, is that sense we get of it. So to be managed without being led is terrible. But the converse question is also true. Have you ever been led without being managed? And I've seen this, a lot of what Mintzberg talks about as deeming. So you deem something to happen. In practice, that looks like setting goals with no explanation of how we're going to get there. Setting a goal as if it magically means that that's the work done. Yes, I want a 10% increase in sales. I need a 15% decrease in costs. We must enter a new market. That's the vision piece. And getting everybody excited about that with no management piece to that. And I have seen that mess. I believe that we see it in South Africa a fair bit, particularly in the state-owned entity space, people making broad, grand claims about where they want to go, what they want to achieve, but with no real practical management route to that. So, to bring that home a little, these are very recent headlines. Richards Bay Coal Terminal exports rise by 10% as Transnet rebounds. So you can see in the quote that it was attributed to the management team that had been brought to bear on the problem. And then the other headline at the moment is the South African airports grappling with fuel shortages under the management of AXA. And for me, state-owned entities are a fascinating case study in management theory because, we argue that a successful organization has a clear purpose. So an absolutely clear reason for existing. It has a clear sense of the capabilities that it needs and the processes that it should use to achieve its goals. And it's got systems in place to deliver relatively clear roles inside the organization as important things. It's got customers who want its products, and it's got money so that it can fund what it's doing. And if you think about a state-owned enterprise, all of them have those. Those are given. So when you suddenly see a state-owned enterprise move from failure to success, it's not as if any of those other things suddenly came into existence. I mean, we know why the airports company exists, and we know why Transnet exists. And they've got budgets, they've got money, they've got people, it's all there. So the thing that shifts when you suddenly see dirty streets become clean, potholes to road repair, is management. That's the piece that changes. And it's like a little magic power. And it's not just leadership, because in all of those cases, there's been leaders saying, well, we need to transform, we need to focus on this, or we need to focus on that. So drawing on Mintzberg fairly broadly, he worries particularly about this view of heroic leadership. This focus on individual brilliance and charisma, the leader, the vision and inspiration, priority. But then, because pure leadership is not management, disconnected from day-to-day reality. So, you know, another wonderful Mintzberg quote: you don't understand an organization until you try to change it, and not just talk about changing, get your hands in there, roll your sleeves up, get into the weeds and actually try and change it. And too many of the heroic leaders don't have any mud under their fingernails. Celebrated often for short-term wins, and then very much about this top-down decision-making, the heroic leader, even if there is consultation, finally being the leader, you know. As opposed to grounded management, there is a focus in grounded management on team dynamics, prioritizing execution and operational excellence, deeply engaged in systems and people management, long-term organizational resilience, because those managers are there for the long haul. They're not chopping and changing the way many of the leadership as we see it does. And then the bottom-up feedback and collaboration in the management space. So, you know, to make the point even more and possibly belabor the point, I think the distinction matters. I don't think it's semantics. I don't think you can get away with saying, yes, but good leadership does all of this. And I want to use a metaphor to illustrate that. And it's the metaphor of the liver and the kidneys inside your body. You know, at some level, you might think that they're the same. They both serve an overall filtering function for your body. They both regulate waste removal. They manage different substances coming into your bloodstream, and they both contribute to overall health. But, you know, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but the liver is a kind of a powerhouse of transformation in your body, and the kidneys are really about this continuous work of filtering and balancing and filtering and balancing, and your body, of course, needs both. But I don't want to go to a doctor that confuses my liver with my kidneys. And, you know, for the professionals on the call, in a sense, we are the doctors. We're supposed to be able to tell the difference between leadership and management, liver and kidney. And of course, as a human being, it's useful to understand the difference between the two, and to understand how to take care of your liver and how to take care of your kidneys. So even as a manager inside the business, I mean, firstly, to not feel bad about your title, to not think that just because I've been called a manager, I'm suddenly being labeled as this negative perception person standing at the back always whipping people. And to have a more positive view of management, including its leadership function, of course. Remember that classical management includes leadership. So what if we look a little bit more deeply at these critiques, and then I'll take you to a model that tries to break it down a bit further. So Mintzberg's leadership, overemphasis on charisma and individualism, you know, whether or not the theory says this should be the case in organizational settings, you know, the leadership is portrayed as this charismatic individual who single-handedly drives organizational success. I think that neutralizes the contribution of teams and other organizational functions, and it does create a cult of personality around these leaders. And in a way, it's like a narcissism engine. So even if you started out as a humble leader, this cult of leadership over time just can infuse a kind of a toxic flavor to a leader. And you see lots of stories about really good managers who rise to businesses. The cult of leadership takes over. They get glorified in the press, in the business press, and they write their book, and suddenly they're Goshen, going from hero at Nissan to villain. They're Rudy Giuliani, going from hero of New York to this broken wreck that we have stumbling about in American politics. So heroic leadership often emphasizing the leader's ability to set a bold vision or direction, but vision alone ain't enough. I think Tom Peters tried to make some of that point. Vision alone isn't enough. You need robust systems and operations. There's a short-term focus, and we see that in remuneration around leadership programs. We haven't found a good solution to that yet. And then this disconnection. So abstract ideas like inspiration and transformation without practical ideas of how we're going to get this done. How will we take where we are and shift people, systems, processes to achieve anything. On the other hand, in the advocacy for management, managers have to integrate and coordinate. Managers sit as this kind of layer, like glue, between the strategy and execution, making sure that people and processes and systems are aligned with organizational goals. And they're there. I mean, they're at every level of first-line managers, junior middle managers, senior middle managers. They're within the layers. They're all over these organizations. They understand the systems and the processes because they work with them every day. They really understand the limitations and the potential of the structures inside the organization. They cannot get their job done without building relationships and with some degree of empathy. It's possible that the first time they become managers, they don't understand the usefulness of the network and the networking work of a manager, but quite quickly they figure out that they're constantly trading and dealing with other managers at peer level. They're trading and dealing with external suppliers, with contractors. They're having to work inside the organization with information flows and task clarity. And then really, they're the ones who build the one-to-one relationships with the people that are doing the work. And then they have to balance continuity and change. You can't sit in a room with first level or junior middle or middle managers who aren't struggling with the rate of change being poured down from the heroic executive leaders, and at the same time trying to deliver some value to a customer, or get some process working. So managers are essential for holding things together during change, and trying to make sure that the transitions are smooth and viable. All right, so hopefully that's enough of manager, leader. Let's look at two models, and unashamedly, one of them is ours. So we did spend a lot of time, effort, and energy in the early part of the century developing a model of leadership that wasn't rocket science. It's pretty well known. Dealing with vision first. So where are we going? Community, who's going there? And then alignment. How do you try and bring those together? Then thinking about leading teams, then that individual consideration of individuals, and then right into the work of the leader as a human being, the energy that it requires, both the quality and quantity of energy, and then that inner introspection of who am I? And right into things like the Enneagram. If I am this kind of person, what kind of leader can I be? And then moving on. Well, you contrast that with Mintzberg's model of management, which I think is potentially one of the best models I've ever seen of management. And you're less likely to have seen this before, so I'll take a moment to try and explain it. Firstly, he talks about 3 planes of managing. So you see right in the center, there's the manager, and the manager sitting on the information plane, firstly. And then the second plane is the people plane, and the third plane is the action plane. So managers are working with information, people, and action. Then on each of those planes, we have some of the work of managers, starting with in that central plane around the manager, framing. And for those of you who've been with Worldview for a long time, we know that we talk about issue, frame, contextualize, organize, mobilize as part of the OD practice. Mintzberg talks about framing in the same way that we did. It's choosing what to focus on. In the noisy life of a manager, and I want to emphasize noisy life of a manager, because when you actually observe managers at work, they have highly fragmented days. They're solving problems, their doors are open, people coming to them, disturbances arise in the business, there are tensions and issues and all sorts of things that are coming at them, and they're having to choose in those moments, how do I pick my frame and solve this problem? And then scheduling. So what do we prioritize? What do we deal with first? How do we keep things going while we put out this fire? Then it's still in the information plane, communicating outside and inside the organization. So there's this information flow that comes at managers from above. We've got new data, new reports, new directives, information from suppliers, information from contractors, all of that channeling into the managers. And then they've got to try and communicate that out, filtered through the framing that they've done. So what are the priorities? How do I filter and package this information and get it moving? Then we get into the people plane, and leading now comes up for the first time, or the only time in Mintzberg's model, and there is a requirement that a good manager leads in every sense of the word that we understand leading to be: to inspire, to motivate, to care, to be passionate about both the direction and about the people that are involved in the organization. But if you flip around to the other side of that people plane, you've got linking, and the manager is linking to other people, not just subordinates, linking to other managers, linking to the boss, linking to suppliers, and spending a fair amount of time on the people plane, trying to make sense of what's going on and communicate. And then we get to the action plane and doing. Managers who never do are a bit like those isolated leaders. So they've got to get into the work to be done in the unit. And part of that doing can sometimes look like standing in for a subordinate who's on leave, sitting in on project meetings, visiting clients with salespeople, really out there in an action space, with the team. But also, if you flip around to the other side of that action plane, there's this dealing, which is very much an action thing, trading off with other managers, linking with other departments, but translating that linkage into, if you can do this for my customers, I can do this for your unit, dealing with suppliers, making contracts, dealing with contractors. So you've got some sense of the life of a manager. And if you do very simple maths and you add up all of the activities on all of the planes, you get to a very rough mathematical conclusion that in a manager's life, 12.5% of the activity is leading. 87.5% of the manager's life is a lot of other stuff. And what I believe is most of the failures we see in organizational life in South Africa, particularly in the obvious spaces like state-owned entities, is coming from the missing 87.5%. That's some illusion of managers as hands-off leaders who can proclaim things but not communicate, control, schedule, frame, link, deal, do as well. So if you become a manager in an organization, you were an employee, become a manager, we typically call that a first-line manager. And their first exposures on the information plane, they're suddenly getting bombarded with a whole bunch of information from above and from sideways that they've never had before. And I don't know how we prepare them for that in any of the interventions that we do. And then as they move up into middle management, that information load gets even bigger. So the abilities to frame, schedule, and control and communicate on the information plane alone is significant. We know that first-line managers are used to the action plan, they're used to doing, that was their job, so they've got to now prioritize what they do and how they do, and then they've got to figure out through leading on the people plane how they can help other people do stuff. And that a lot looks like coaching, mentoring, training, supporting, encouraging, and I think we do a reasonable job of teaching them how to do that on the leadership plane. So this 87.5% of missing stuff feels about right to me. If I go back to my observations as I drive through Pretoria or I visit Cape Town, I mean, those are two great contrasts. I recently did a road trip down to see the kids in the Cape and stopped in a few towns on the way. You can't argue that the people who are running those towns lack purpose or, frankly, even lack finance. But they do seem to lack management. And then as you just somehow magically hit the Western Cape, you get a sense of there's management. Things are being done. I was lucky enough to do an assignment a few years ago with the city of Cape Town's just municipal services, so the people who fix potholes and the system they have of getting road reports every single day, work schedules, buckies get loaded, crews go out, things get fixed. They come back, it's ticked off on a system. The politicians have view of that system so that they can see if their residents are happy with the fact that a pothole got fixed or a stop street got put up or whatever the case may be. And these are working men and women in blue overalls, being well managed and feeling well managed. And yes, there's some leadership and there's some camaraderie, but there's definitely a whole lot of doing, and there's very good information flows and very good, beyond leadership spaces. So we get to this question of what's your view? And I think I've managed to get there in reasonable time. Do we perhaps value charisma over operational excellence in South Africa? Is it a Is it just my imagination, or is this one of the post-apartheid culture things that's crept into everything, where operational excellence is somehow something, or management is somehow tarnished with an apartheid brush, or something else? Is it bigger? Is it global? Have we become too woke about the basics of management? Do we think there's a higher return on investment in leadership development than in management development? Do we associate management with boring technical skills rather than strategic thinking, which is just not necessarily true? And for those of you that are in operations, what is your budget telling you? What gets more of your budget? Is it leadership or management development? So I'd like you to head out into some groups, chat about that, and then come back into plenary, and then we all get to unpack this in a way that would make Louise's heart happier than this monologue I've just given. Hopefully Louise's managed to stick in. So the questions that you could take into the breakout is, do we understand enough about full range management? And I've called it full range management just to try and emphasize that we can't just use management as if we have a vague idea of what it is. Do we understand enough about what it does on the information and people and action plans? And then are we overcooking leadership development on the people plane? Or do you think we have the right balance?
No, not nice. The whiplash.
I'm sorry.
Wow.
I did see the 2-minute clock, but then that was not 2 minutes. It felt like 6 seconds.
I actually gave you 3 minutes more than Craig said I must give you. So, you know.
Well, we've got some brilliant people on the call. I really am desperate to hear how their conversation went. I was in room 2, so I got to play. Liesel, will you, for those of you who haven't been on a World Street call before, somebody from each room is now invited to just tell us what you noticed about that conversation. So try and avoid replaying the conversation. You know, that's, it's less useful at this point than you just saying, what did you notice? I might lead you off by saying that in room 2, I noticed a lot of defensiveness around the leadership development side. Like don't paint leadership with a bad brush, leadership development, and not a lot of focus on what are we missing on the management side. So there was this tension, and I'll leave it at that. So could somebody kick us off from room 1? Liesel, you'll know who was in room 1. What did you guys notice?
Beatrice and Colin are still here. Linda had to leave.
I hope she was there for at least some of it.
She just popped into the main room a minute before the conversation ended to say goodbye. So yeah, she was there.
All right. I guess Colin's going to debrief, or Beatrice.
Yeah, Beatrice. Yeah. Okay. I think what I noticed is, to a large extent, we're on the same page. We had slightly different views, but there's this overall feeling that there is a lot of confusion out there in the market as trainers, as facilitators, and you know, in Linda's case, someone who's trying to get a consultant in to come and do training. There's a lot of confusion around, is it leadership? Is it management? And what are the skills needed on the other side?
Beatrice, anything to add there? Thanks, Colin. And nice to meet you.
As well.
Yeah, thanks. I think a nice point raised by Linda was that managing is hard work. And then she went on to list a whole lot of attributes linked to leadership, which I don't know about you, Colin, but it made management sound like the hard grind stuff, and leadership sounds like this kind of perfumed thing that wafts around the corridors occasionally. So that's one thing that I noticed. And the other thing that was very telling, and it's one of my bugbears, I have to share it, is emotional intelligence and the link to leadership development. So there's Linda trying to get this kind of, how shall I say, concrete, good management skills development program in place for people. People must know how to problem solve and decision make and delegate and all those good things. And this guy said, no, but they must do emotional intelligence assessment first, because that is the forerunner to everything. And so that led us into a conversation around, so what comes first, chicken or egg? Do you develop great, good, hardcore management skills first and then develop the leadership stuff? Or, is there a difference? So what I noticed is that we are probably as confused as a whole lot of people out there. Okay.
In room 2, Skulk and Talisa were there. Maybe Talisa can kick us off with what his reflections are on room 2, and Skulk can back it up.
Yeah, thank you. Guys, we within the room, the reflection there was that there is a lot of leadership focus that possibly is happening. However, then it is at the detriment of the management principles. So you have people who are, develop this side as leadership. And I think one speaker spoke about emotional intelligence and the application thereof within the workspace. But now the question is, have we developed enough as far as management, the real core, is concerned? And that could be where the gap is.
Skulk, you want to build on that?
No, I think I'm fine. I'll stick with it.
Stick with that. Thank you. Room 3, I don't know who was in room 3, Lisa.
Nevin, Richard, and Runel.
Oh. Who's a representative for room 3?
I think we are representativeless, but I can go. Just
thanks, Nevin.
What I noticed is that I'm a psychotherapist. Richard is doing the administrative stuff at World's View, and Ronel actually agreed with the premise. So there wasn't any tension or any defensiveness. We were actually able to hear each other quite well, and I think our main agreement was that in these organizations, and Ronald spoke to her personal experience here, that management skills are not being trained enough. In fact, it's very serendipitous, this meeting, because Ronald was saying that they just had a meeting where they stated exactly what this meeting is about, that management skills are being underemphasized. And we also, toward the end of the discussion, we spoke about how sometimes some people are good managers, but then they're pushed onto a leadership track, or they're pushed up the hierarchy, and then they actually don't do as well further up in that hierarchy, or in other kinds of leadership positions that require more conceptual, broad level thinking, and that we perhaps need to celebrate them growing within the management space and not trying to push everyone along a specific leadership track, as some organizations tend to do. And then we also just spoke about how there's a messiness here in terms of what leadership effectiveness actually means, or management effectiveness. Just whoever's at the top of that hierarchy. What do we mean by effective? Do we mean they're able to influence people in a shared direction, or is the emphasis on they're able to influence people in a shared direction that contributes to performance, to the actual performance of the organization? Because we're just saying, as human beings, we're wired to follow certain traits. Sometimes things like height and a deep voice matters in terms of how we're wired, but that doesn't necessarily translate into performance in a modern world where we're not designed from a neurological perspective to select leaders or to be drawn to leaders who have a complex understanding of organizational dynamics. That's not something we've evolved to be drawn towards. So we also, chatted a bit about that.
Yeah, who becomes the leader? Is it the expert on the organization, or B, the tall white guy?
Yeah.
And globally, the answer is the tall white guy. South Africa, it's a tall, different colored guy, but and as you say, deep voice. Leadership and management. Renelle is in a large South African institution, and maybe delightful to hear that what I'm feeling is being echoed in management discussions inside those institutions. I wonder if South Africa is breaking because we've lost respect for management. And I'm not saying that's the only reason, of course, but that we keep looking to leadership, and we need to start doing something in celebration of management. Anybody else in room 3 want to add or build on what Nevin's said?
And I think I just had that thought as well, is that there's a strong emphasis on self-learning. And so in Nedbank, we have a platform where you can go and learn. It's like LinkedIn Learning. You have access to so much. So there's almost a pressure on managers to learn these things. But it's a skill. There's no opportunity to practice before I become a manager. So I think that's where we've lost a lot of. We don't run pure management training anymore, because
yes.
And we have cut budgets on leadership development. It's not because the conversation is that you send one leader go to Harvard or wherever they go, but you could have trained 20 other people, and your return on investment is great. And that conversation has been going for a long, long time. But I think we need more practical. That was our small team conversation. We're just part of one of the divisions. So we need to start having this conversation. How do we bring back management skills, training and practice into the business? And we will remember there was a time that we really focused on the whole trotter pipeline, and as you take the turn. But there was also it was a complexity for managers to let go of what they're good at and lead, because so I meddle in other people's business all the time as a leader now, because I'm so used to, and that's my comfort, to manage. So it's not one or the other. We need both, but it's the balance and the percentage of the focus. So I just remember at one point, one of the definitions, or how we try to explain a competency of management, was that a manager is there to operationalize the vision or the strategy. And sometimes that's where the struggle comes, because I don't have the skill to do that. So the easiest way is to say, well, John said so, and that's why we're going to do this. But I don't buy into that, because you need to explain it to me so it makes sense to me. So that whole sense making of what to do. And where we find really great leaders is where the leader actually gets their hands dirty, as you said, because they understand the organization. And it doesn't always mean that somebody has to grow from within the organization. But in where it's complex processes and systems, the leaders that do understand the business well and how it functions, and has made time to learn, if they come from a different discipline or different organization, we see them being more successful than somebody just being charismatic and trying to run and influence. So yeah, that's my.
You've said so much rich content there, Renelle, and so much of it echoes what I'm hearing from this advocate for managers, Henry Mintzberg. But I think part of the problem is that we don't understand management development as well as I think maybe we should. Mintzberg's point, and I'll make this again later, I've got a couple more slides I'll share if there's time, is firstly, as you said, management is a practice. It's very difficult to learn it in a classroom. One of the things that Mintzberg did at the university, I think that he's at, is that they changed they added to their management development programs in-house, in-company, conversation-based management development programs. So they firstly brought the university into the organization rather than the students into the university. And they put light models down, and it's 80% conversational. So the managers are learning from each other in the context of the organization they're managing. So how do we deal with this, you know? And what emerges is these problems on the information plane. Yes, problems on the people plane, but I think over the last 20 years, we've quite successfully democratized the notions of leadership such that people can get them on YouTube, frankly. And then the action plane, that we created this illusion that the great manager sits at their desk and thinks, and that, you know, it looks like the leader, and that the work must be delegated to others. Somehow we created that illusion. And what we did was we broke the connection between thought and action. And as you say, the greatest of the leaders or managers actually still have dirt under their fingernails, not every moment of the day, but certainly enough through the week that they are in touch with reality. Anybody else in room 3 picking up on this before we go to room 4, or have we done a good job of capturing room 3? Who's in 4, Liesel?
Imran, Mbali, and Narissa.
So I'll give an executive summary and my fellow roommates can chip in. So basically what we got to, without me getting in the weeds of it, what we got to in our conversation is creating a balance. So we do acknowledge the fact that you can't have one and not the other. So it's all about creating a balance. And another thing that we got to is this should be an issue of context. So you need to understand what type of organization you're in and what is needed in that specific organization. And we quickly referred to last year's conversation on Henry Mintzberg's organizational types, and noting that the type of leadership you will observe in a personal enterprise cannot be the same as the program machine. So it matters what type of organization you're talking about, and also understanding the needs of a specific organization, which brings me to Narissa's point where she made an example of her industry. She's in the BPO industry, and they have realized that what they actually need in their organization is actually leadership skills, because inherently management skills are already there, and what is needed the most right now is leadership development. So we agreed that it's all about context. Where are you as an organization? What do you need right now? And also acknowledging the fact that leadership is sort of like an umbrella. You cannot have a charismatic leader that doesn't understand the management part of the business, and also the other way around. So please add Imran and Narissa.
Yep. So those were our biggest takeaways, like Mbali's mentioned, and specifically in the industry in which I work in. I made the example of, you don't often have people who are stepping into the BPO industry for the first time. They come in with experience for years, decades. But where they lack is the leadership. They are so process driven, they are so structured, they are so well versed in the industry that they do not know how to deliver that message. And that's why we focus more on the leadership part. And we kind of spoke around leadership being the umbrella and management being a skill or a characteristic that you need to have to be a good leader. Also noting the fact that we speak a lot about occupational levels, and when we look at managers and leaders, they come from different occupational levels, or you're looking at first line, junior, semi-skilled, whatever it is. A leader or leadership can come from anybody who gets people's buy-in. And that's very important to note, regardless of the occupational level.
Thanks, Narissa. I don't know whether you can talk about this, and please feel free to say you can't. But I'm very curious about the kinds of behaviors you're seeing that leads you to conclude that it's leadership development that's needed?
So if we look at, and I'll speak about the industry, we focus heavily on, so if you're looking at a management development course or leadership development course, you're looking at a team leader and above. So people who are essentially managing a team of 15 to 100 people at any given time. We focus a lot on coaching and mentoring, which you use specific OD models to coach, to develop, to give the feedback. But what we notice is it's very easy for me to listen to your call and see that you didn't give the right outcome to the customer or you didn't use the right process. It's very easy for a manager or for a team leader to pick up on that. But when they're in that one-on-one session and I'm coaching Craig on, this is what I picked up on your call, I don't know how to give that message. I go in, this is what you've done wrong. This is what I need you to do. You've got a 2-week turnaround for me to see the improvement. But there is no two-way conversation to say, what did you, or how do you think the call went? And then open up the conversation. So the leadership part in that emotional intelligence that everyone's been speaking about, that's what we've picked up. And that's what's led us to focus more on leadership.
Coming from performance management and feedback issues.
Yes. Just as an example, yes.
Thank you. Imran, anything to add from what came out of your group?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I think also for us, the important thing is definitely the context, but also is how do we deal the different generations that must show up in the world of work today. They would require, different things. And what comes to mind is from a Gen Z perspective, they would generally, those are the younger guys, they would, build, I don't know, execution skills, for example, and that would sit squarely in the management training thing. Whereas from a leadership training perspective, the Gen Xers, the Afrillennials, baby boomers would, as they move into higher roles, we see a stuckness there already. That is where that leadership, I think, training would come through. And then also where we want to catch the younger guys, we create that blended environment. But we, as the specialists, the thought leaders, the people that reads up and engage on this all the time, is to provide that context of, is it management, is it leadership, irrespective of what you call it. Because we also get into the trap that we consult to a business, they want leadership training, but the whole discussion is management stuff. So how do we create, yes, we can call it whatever, but this is where it fits in. What is a model? What is a framework? I think that. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Imran. I'm tempted to follow on, but I want to try and open up. Liesl, I assume that was all the rooms?
That was all the rooms, yeah.
Okay, so an invitation to anybody now who's reflected on those conversations and has a follow-on thought before I dive into anything that I wanted to say. If you could maybe either just speak out or put your hand up or use the chat box. We'll try and monitor that. We'll just try and get 5 minutes or so. So use your time preciously. What are your thoughts and observations now that you've heard all of the groups? Are you getting to any conclusion?
Craig, I'm going to jump in. I think for me, what we must be mindful of is that we don't want to create echo chambers, and we don't just want to because after a while the discussions just sound the same, and because our circle is so small, and we go, whether it's a thought leader of this or thought leader of that, then we go, that is it. But are we having the flip discussion and say, who are the detractors on this thing? Who are not agreeing with this thing? So for us to then pivot and create a vertical on the blue ocean thinking that you mentioned right at the beginning, because that, I think, becomes the key question. Is it part of the blue ocean thinking today, or are we just in an echo chamber where we don't see the light? Thank you.
And Imran, to your point, what we see is if you take those models that I was sharing and using Mintzberg's model, we see thought leaders becoming specialists in, of course, leadership, which is one aspect of that management model. We also see thought leaders in communication, in scheduling, in framing, in control. You know, I mean, for a long time, leadership and management were about control. And now, of course, that pendulum has swung away from that. So we all, and then even within the leadership discussion, we become thought leaders in a specific aspect of the leadership discussion. And if you get 20 thought leaders talking about the aspects of leadership, it feels like you're having a rich discussion, but you're all just talking about leadership, not talking about the rest of the management, shall we say, playing field. And I still get this feeling that even on this call, with all the expertise we have here, we're more likely to agree on a shared model of leadership than we are on a shared model of management. We don't have one that we could all go, yeah, that one, you know. Anybody else want to join in or chime in?
Craig,
I
can just a quick side point. In my own practice working with individuals, I've realized that people struggle a bit more with operationalization of systems and processes into their own life than the having a vision, a purpose, having an aspiration. So just an interesting fun fact there. You know, people know what they want, but actually establishing the habits, having implementation intentions, and then also not taking for granted what they already have in their life, what is working, right? Which I feel sometimes is the domain of management, to keep, we just have this like lack of gratitude because we're always in that, we're always hedonically adapting to what we do have. And so what we don't have is always a bit more appealing. And maybe that plays a role in our attraction to leadership, because it's about novelty, it's about change, it's about aspiration versus, and then we adapt to that, we adapt to what we have, and then we take it for granted, and then we sometimes don't maintain what is working. So anyways, just a side point there. But I just also wanted to add here in this discussion, what I am noticing is that I don't think we should say that this problem is just semantics, because of the fact that I think the semantics, how the problem is defined here, or the way that people use the term leadership or management, or how they understand what's encapsulated by those terms, it seems to be having an actual impact in what people ignore versus what people pay attention to. And because, if they define management or leadership in a specific way, they might not even realize that some of these management skills are outside of their attention. And so they might totally neglect it. So I just wanted to add here that whether it is semantics or not, it's still important the way that the semantics are being used, because it's messing with what we pay attention to.
Thanks, Nevin. And I had to keep reminding myself, because even my own colleagues challenged me on the topic for today, that, you know, are we playing word games? And metaphors like the liver and the kidneys really help me at this point. If we look around South Africa, we are losing ground globally in so many organizations, so many areas. It's not just the state-owned entities. I mean, we're deindustrializing at a heck of a rate. We have so many assets that are not being put to good use, I guess, including people. And yet we're drowning in leadership messages and drowning in calls for leadership and drowning in leadership solutions. What's missing? And I think there's something to this management conversation. Obviously, I haven't put my finger on exactly what it is yet, but I think conversations like this and colleagues such as yourselves get us there. I didn't want to leave you hanging, though. So for those of you who might have been curious about, so what? You know, firstly, I think because management's a practice, then I think organizational development approaches are a beautiful place, a beautiful way to start. It's not it's not just a skill that you can pump into somebody by sending them off. I have an MBA. I'm very proud of it. I don't know that it made me a better manager. So firstly, good organizational development process design, create a management development process, and find some kind of framework or model. I'm advocating Mintzberg. I've got nothing to gain by doing that, but I think that Mintzberg has thought about management more comprehensively and over a longer period than almost anybody else. And he openly includes Kotter and Peters and all of the other great leadership and management theorists in his approach. So, to stop and rethink what we're doing as management development work. And then, of course, facilitate conversation among good managers. Just use standard AD practice to facilitate peer-based conversations among managers. What are you stuck on? What are you struggling with? And then let the curriculum emerge from the dialogue. So don't be too prescriptive about the curriculum. And then infuse your leadership and management development stuff into that process. So it is over time, but well, that's how managers are learning anyway. They're learning on the job and they're learning over time, and our best effort is to accelerate that. So let's get in. And if I had to think of one catalytic action, it's to put a celebration of management back on the table and recognize that it includes leadership, but leadership definition does not include management. And I want, as much as you all want to try and include management as part of leadership, that is not the definition of leadership. But the definition of management includes leadership. And there's something there that we can bring back and respect. To everybody who was on the call, thank you, because you genuinely have helped me and us move a conversation forward. Next month is February, and it's, Valentine's Day. And even if you don't get some love on Valentine's Day, could you join us for next month's conversation? And we'll give you some love because we're going to talk about power and love. It's the same sort of themes, by the way. You might think that management is power and leadership is love. You can make that connection. There are better connections. We're going to be basing this one on a book by a gentleman called Adam Kahane, and the book is called Power and Love. If you haven't read it, get one, and we're giving a copy of the book away. In fact, in the call for the participant with the most power and love. So follow us on LinkedIn, comment on our posts. Please, if you see Louise commenting on this conversation, join the hell in so that we can put it out there and see what it creates. To all of you, thanks for a great 90 minutes.